morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this session of Tea Time Talks with MDRP. Today, we are going to be talking about risk management process for medical devices. Now, if you've been in the industry, whether it is medical devices or it is any other kind of product, pharmaceutical or any non-healthcare product also, you know that risk management becomes a very crucial step before bringing any product into the market. Since these medical devices are going to be used for clinical setups and on patients, risk management becomes even more important. So today we are going to be deciphering the different nuances of risk management along with our expert speaker, Shalu. Hi, Shalu. Welcome to this discussion. And before we begin, let's have a quick intro from your side.
Hello everyone. As Anushri already mentioned as expert, but I would like to just not say I'm an expert, but myself, Shalu Sudhir. I am, to brief introduction, I am a development manager for a company which specializes in dental implants and prosthetics right now. And I am responsible mainly for risk management activities and management of technical documentation and design control for new devices. And just for briefly, last 2 years, I've been heavily involved with the MDR and risk assessment as per the new ISO 14971. So feel free to ask any questions and I'll try my best to answer your questions or to discuss further topics.
All right. Thank you so much, Shalu. And I think that with your experience and your expertise in this field, I don't think I was not wrong in calling you an expert. But let's go ahead and now dive into the specific discussion that we have. Okay, so moving on to the specific questions that we have for you today, because these are more than questions, these are topics that we want to dive into. I want to start off with a very basic thing. Most of the device manufacturers, they know that they need to initiate the risk analysis for the device, and that risk management, overall risk management and methodology is crucial for the device marketing into global markets. When does a manufacturer need to initiate risk analysis for a device?
Yeah, so maybe the slide will help. I guess all of us are very, very familiar with all the steps we have usually in the device development. So as you can see on the slides, I just presented a little bit more colorful so that it doesn't phase as we all making the concept or just an idea of having a medical device or any device. Then you go on to the next stage, feasibility. Then you explain or define your user needs, user wishes. Then is the all technical stuff comes into place, specification requirements. Then you have your V&V and finally your medical devices in the market. So most commonly what I have experienced and mostly manufacturers do is they really start risk management activities or even analyzing any risk after they have defined their functional specifications and requirements. So I would like to just tell you people, you need to really start identification of risks as soon as you conceptualize the device. That's very, very important. So it really should start at the beginning when you have an idea and when you are doing the feasibility evaluation for the device. And please make a note that you really start documenting everything. It doesn't mean that you have to have your proper risk management plan and the strategy just at the concept level. That's not really necessary. What necessary is you have started identifying that this concept, if we bring to market, can have which kind of harms or what can go wrong with the device. So I would say you really start just at the concept phase with identification of risks. You really cannot do evaluation, mitigation, or control at this level, but start with the concept phase, identifying all the risks and start documenting them. That's
Wow.
my take on starting. And it's very, very helpful. Once you've identified the risks, it becomes easier to define strategies later.
Right, right. And I think, Shalu, this is where most manufacturers tend to struggle because I think
Yeah,
a general understanding is that risk analysis will happen down the line. But like you
yeah,
said, you need to start thinking at the conception stage itself. And most important, the flags that I see on top, start documenting. It's
thing.
so
Yes.
important to have that kind of documentation.
Yeah, it's very, very important that you start immediately documenting, but then you have to make a bit of realization that please do not go overboard with the documentation of having. If somebody tells you, okay, have you started risk analysis, then at the concept phase, please do not over document and try to have your strategies and risk management plans. That's not necessary. But what you should document is what potential risks it can have, means kind of initial identification. Okay, if I do this, if we have this, what can happen, what can go wrong. And this will really help you if you document to further in future steps. When you check feasibility, then you go back again. Okay, in the concept phase we thought this can happen, then during feasibility, if we the device is feasible, even design, can it have more risks, potential risks, or is it still same? So then you go stepwise ahead, but please start writing down or documenting.
Does anybody have any questions in this regard before we move on to the next topic? Okay, now this is a question to which the answer even I'm trying to understand. We all know FMEA, failure mode and effects analysis. We've heard about it a lot. We've seen this document in a lot of manufacturers' files also. But what exactly is an FMEA and what are its different types? If you could discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, let's discuss. Maybe the next slide might help if we show this one. Yeah, so we all know, I guess each and every one of us is very familiar with FMEA. And we know that it's a very, very good tool. But only thing is that what you do FMEA, I guess you really try to have take into account each and every possible failure a device can have. And then you need to differentiate, or traditionally whatever we have done till now, till past few years, is all the possible failures, either you take them together, very old approach, or you in the recent years FME has been divided into that you have a design FME, means in that portion you consider all possible failures your design can have. So then you're very happy at the end. Okay, we've considered all failures, we've taken care of everything, and now we have a better design which we can send to production. So you go a step ahead. And then there is your process FMEs. Then come the failure modes, which can happen during manufacturing or during processing, during assembling, during packaging, or in such when you distribute the product. So then we started having different kind of setup for this one, because it's usually not very ideal to have design and process failures all together, especially for medical device. If it's a software, maybe it's a different matter. But then you have all your process FMEs taken care. Again, you're very happy because you really are very confident that you have prevented all possible failures or defects in the product, which further goes to market. So it's, you can say, like design FMEA is your tool to have a better design for production. Then you have process FMEAs, which is your preventive strategy that there is no defective product going to the market. But that is what FMEA is really exactly, only according to me, or it's kind of a reliability tool where you make sure your product is reliable. It works fine. It doesn't have these failure modes which can harm the user. But then main thing is that all risks which you identify with this tool are only related to failure, nothing else. So let's go a bit. I know it's a bit tricky and tough to get into this, but I will try to make it very simple. FMEA is a very nice tool to identify and prevent failures and further potential harms, but it's not a complete system in itself. And as you can see on my slide, the major problem is FMEAs never consider use or user risks. So there's again a difference between use and user risk. Use is normal use of the device, but then there is a foreseeable, which you can say a misuse or foreseeable use. You know, you designed this, you will use it in a certain way, but you never know when it's in the hand of a clinician or a dentist, how they use it. So FMEA really lacks this part. So FMEA gives you a reliable product, but it's no guarantee that your product is safe. That's why right now it's really kind of non-compliance. If you go to 14971 and MDR, FMEA is outdated as a total system. But please don't discard this tool from your risk identifications and initial stages. It's a very, very good tool to identify failures. So what we usually lack here with FMEA is, which I kind of depicted with a broken point, we do not have a link to the user risks, which can happen. So maybe it answers some of the questions, Anushri, for you and others, or you have more questions for this one?
Does anybody have question on FMEA? All right. So I have a thought here, Shalu. I was thinking that as a device manufacturer, I think it's also so important whether you're in the risk management field or you're on the design field, of course, but everybody needs to be really familiar and be able to visualize how the product works. Because when you talk about design FMEA, process FMEA, and such, you are basically visualizing what can go wrong, how can it be used differently and may lead to some sort of harm. So it becomes so important to actually understand the device in its entirety before you can work on any aspects of these things, right?
Any aspect, yes. And more important is this user stuff, which really is missing. Even I have seen in lots of earlier things which I remediated, there is no section or no FMEA or no risks which were documented with the viewpoint of user. What can go wrong when it's in the hand of a user? What can be foreseeable use or misuse? Exactly. So you need to really involve, I guess it's all the manufacturers, what they usually lack is involving the end user in the beginning. They really think once we have a device which is verified, then we go to users for validation. That's the traditional approach. But that's really not a very good approach. You should really involve end users or clinical experts when you are doing your initial identification, because they are the people who will use this one. So that's one that all of the whole team as such, from development to designers to quality, everyone should be involved, especially regulatory, which are usually left out at this point, but they should be involved because they have very good inputs that I guess it's another topic then we can discuss. Regulatory people should be involved in this, plus the end user. So that's what we lack with FMEAs. We never consider user, we never involve them ever.
Absolutely. And I see that in the chat, we have a question. Is FMEA applicable for 13485 as a risk management tool? And I think you've already touched upon this, but any further thoughts?
Yeah, it is applicable. Means nobody will really tell you that why you use FMEAs. And I also touched upon this, that please don't discard. It's a very good traditional method to have a reliable product. So there's kind of a now differentiation. It's acceptable even in MDR. You can show FMEAs. There is no trouble when you present your risk management system, but then it's not sufficient. It is a tool which can be part of your risk management strategy, but not in itself a risk management system complete. So 13485 will go fine, but you won't be able to show compliance to either 14971 or MDR if you only use FMEA. FMEA can be a part of your whole risk management system, but in itself, it's not a risk management system.
All right. Okay, I think that explains it well.
Or you can do another approach, Anushri. I can give you example. One of my clients did that. I was consulting long back. They had this very nice thing, design and process, manufacturing FMEAs. So what they did, instead of completely overhauling, but that depends on your device, it was a low risk device. What they did is they did a third FMEA. They called it like DFMEA, design one, process FMEA, PFMEA, and then they did a UFMEA. They really went to clinicians, involved them, and they did a third part, user FMEA, user failure mode and effect analysis. Combine all three, and then you have a decent risk management system. That's another approach you can do.
Can you please pardon what you told about this, ma'am? All FMEA 3 types, ma'am?
Yeah, so I can just elaborate, because what if you see right now on your screens, the slide, what we lack with FMEA traditionally is the user risks.
Right,
so to bridge this gap, either you have a complete metrics or complete risk management system overhaul, or you include a user FMEA, which is really very acceptable method to do now. Means you involve users. You do not do it with your design team, development team, or with your testers. You really do it with real users of the device.
Okay.
That's a user FMEA, UFMEA. And then as a whole, if you present your risk assessment or risk analysis in 3 of these documents interconnected to each other, that really works quite well.
Again, I think we did touch upon this also, but what are some other commonly used tools available for risk analysis apart from FMEA?
Yeah, maybe I can touch, but I guess everyone knows this. So apart from FMEA, the tool which I like most for initial stage, when you start, is a preliminary hazard analysis. So that also you should use. Means if you want to list in a whole, you can use different tools and put them all together as a complete risk management system. So you have a PHA, which is a really nice approach. You do only hazard analysis. Okay, which kind of hazards this device can pose, and whether it leads to any harm or it doesn't lead to any harm. So do your PHAs, which is most commonly called, then do your FMEAs, then you can do fault tree analysis. It depends on you, how you want to do it. But only thing you have to keep in mind is that please make sure that all of your tools somehow in the end also involve user risks. So that's very important thing, for which everyone is right now struggling. So please use PHAs, use your FMEA, use your fault tree analysis. So either you use them as 3 separate documents, or maybe get more creative and join them all together and create a risk matrix or a hazard matrix for your systems. Maybe I can show you examples, I guess, in future slides, how to combine all these tools.
How are risk scores assigned? Of course, this is like one topic we see. Yeah, we see across device manufacturers that there are different risk scores that are assigned to different risk. What is the basis for bucketing risk into different zones? These are some of the things that we want to understand, because I think this is core risk analysis. So talking about risk scores and risk zones, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, let's maybe try about the risk scores, but maybe first of all, to understand and become aware of different terms, I would like to say here, or ask everyone, is your team, or are you very clear about at least 4 things? Then you can really do the scoring. First is hazard. If you're not aware, learn and become aware of these terms. What is hazard? What is situation? What is harm? And what is risk? So what most of the times mistake we do is we really confuse between the harm and the risk. So that's first thing that goes in the direction of, if you want to have a good scoring or assign this. So just to make things very simple, a situation or your device can have a hazard. It can have a failure mode, but still, if nobody uses it, just for a very simple reason, there is no risk. So risk only exists if the device is used. So just go back now what we have discussed. Now you will realize why it is so important to have user involved in the analysis of your failure modes. For example, you have a line, okay, you have a knife on the table, fine. It is a very sharp knife. It poses a hazard and it can cut your hand. That is the harm, that your hand can be cut. But that knife just stays on the table for 100 days. Nobody uses it. So that harm never becomes a risk. There is a harm because this is a hazardous device or object, but it does not pose any risk till it is used. So just become a bit more clear about these terms, and then we can go on to the scoring as well. So if we try to now understand with this diagram, what is your hazard and risk? I guess this is really nice. The bomb, it's a hazard, but until unless this bomb goes and hits this person has no risk. So now, if this bomb hits the person, of course, there's a risk. And then before you do the scoring, you need to understand that risk always is associated now with severity and probability. And please read carefully or pay attention that it is not the severity and probability of risk. It is severity and probability of the harm which can happen. So when you combine these two, you have a risk. I guess it becomes a bit more clear now. So when you read carefully, because we really usually don't pay much attention, it's the severity of harm. Severity, person can die. Okay, this is really a bad event. But if the person is 100 kilometers away from this, probability of happening this harm to him is negligible. So that's how you first try to understand probability and severity, and then we go further later on to define how you can define your acceptability or severity. And the second picture in this slide, maybe it gives you more probability. This person now says that in last 20 years, the coffee crop was destroyed 2 times. So you will say, it's really not a very bad risk. This is okay because it just happened 2 times. Okay, probability or frequency of this or likelihood is less. Now on the other side, person lost 75% of the income. So severity of this harm is really bad. The crop was harmed less frequently, but when it was harmed, the severity was very high. So we have to always consider these two together to estimate whether your risk is acceptable or high, or you need to really put strict control measures, or if it is just every time probable and high severity, you need to abandon the device. So maybe then we go to the next slide to explain it a bit more. Anushri, can you do that? Yeah, this one. And this cartoon is also fine. I guess that it's always, please think, if you have even first of all start identifying, which I already I guess touched upon, that you identify what is the hazard, what is the hazardous situation, means when it will happen. That is very, very important, and it's indirectly linked to the again use, because you may identify in your FMEA, this failure mode is crazy, but then it has a failure but hardly any risk to the patient because they don't use it this way. Then there is harm, and then you estimate, which is really now the trickiest part, is probability of occurrence of this harm, then severity of harm, and then multiply or combine them to estimate the risk. And below what you see, this green, blue, green, yellow, red, is a standard one which we get from ISO 14971 or as such. But please make sure that you do not apply it as such as its example in some ISOs. So there are different ways. If suppose you have a class 1 very safe device, there is no need even to give numerical values to your severity levels and define them. Up to 1 to 5, you can maybe do with 1 to 3. It's severe or catastrophic, whatever definition you want to give, that it's really severe if person dies. If it is slight harm which can be treated, is it less severe, or it's just some discomfort, okay, then it's level 1, 2, 3. And same the probability. But if your device is a very high risk device, maybe go further differentiations, what can happen. Of course, the highest severity always remains a permanent damage to health or death. Then, based on your device, go further down. What can happen? Maybe a long term injury, then maybe short term injury which needs additional intervention, then maybe hospitalization, or just doesn't happen anything. Your device is such that it doesn't have all these effects, just 2 or 3. So please define your severities according to the risk class of your device. So when you do this, please make it semi-quantitative. I will again explain this for even later for your risk benefit. It's good to always give numbers, but define these numbers yourself. I define 5 as high severity, means death. I define 1 as slight discomfort for 48 hours. And the same goes with probabilities, but please always try again to match these according to your device, how probable, and involve clinicians or cross teams in understanding how probable it is. So what I would like to suggest you, because what I present here is really just 1 to 5, but usually in reality, what we do before we reach this matrix, we do probabilities 1, 2, and 3. That's what P1, P2, P3, what we do internally in the risk matrix is. P1 is what designer or developers think is the probability of happening this. Second, what a cross-functional team can tell you, or the other data from other devices, similar things can happen or not. And then the user or clinical experts, that how probable they think it can be. Then combine all of them and reach to one probability. But always do probability and severity based on the complexity and the risk class of your device. So once you do this, then you have to define your own strategy and justify it, why you will accept something which is green, I marked accept, why you will accept really something which can lead to death but probability is 1. So can anyone guess why I mark it accept? Because usually it shouldn't be. But if you present this, you just need to justify. Nobody will tell you, you can't say, you have to put it unacceptable. No. You have to really say the benefit is so high that if this severity happens to 1 in 10 millions, we still go with it. So that's what you have to do. The scoring is the toughest part. I can guarantee you it's the toughest part and the most trickiest part to justify why you did this scoring this way. But please always try to do it not standard, pick up from standards or templates. Try to do it always based on your device. Then you evaluate based on your strategies, based on the plans, risk management plan. Third step is to evaluate whether your risk which you estimated, means this P and S, is it acceptable as per your plan? If it is acceptable, very fine, you don't need any measures. Then second is, if you need to reduce these risks somehow, is it required? Evaluate this and then again evaluate according to your definitions or charts. And then in the end, you either reduce all the risks to acceptable levels or justify and reduce them as far as possible, and then justify why you cannot reduce it more. But it is very clear that if you present something which has lots of high risks or in the range of red or unacceptable and you try to justify, that won't work. Then you really need to have a very good justification why you will really accept something which has so many high risks involved. Yeah, does it really make sense somehow, or simplifies a bit of things for scoring? of the risks.
Yes, I think that makes sense. And I see that we also have a question from
Mm-hmm.
Khyati, and she asked, are these
Mm-hmm.
three separate zones still in use, or are only red zone and green zones, which are acceptable and unacceptable, are these the only zones which are used for the state-of-the-art purpose of medical devices?
No, all three. I will say all three because I just recently used AFAP. But then we can, I guess, maybe we need further sessions. When you use these terms as far as possible, that means you really cannot do anything to reduce more, and that becomes your residual risk. And then it becomes another story. Then you go further and explain that why this residual risk is acceptable and how you inform or declare this. So when you, but only thing is, then we will touch upon that it is in use and you have to declare this all the time. And then it has to be accepted by you internally. First, you have to feel confident to convince others. But it is in use. You can really present or market a device with residual risks, proper declaration of these residual risks. But you
All
really
right.
cannot go to market with unacceptable risks. Then it's completely, right now at least last 2 or 3 years, if you're trying to have a CE mark, there is no way unacceptable risks you can justify.
Yes, and I think we will be getting to that in just a couple of minutes with the next question. But before we move on, just want to check, does anybody else have any question before we move on to the next topic?
Ma'am, can you just help me, ma'am? We need to keep the, if suppose I give the number to severity 3 or 4, something like that. So that will be constant even after the mitigation of the risk, ma'am?
No, that severity will be same till you really have a
Yeah.
post-market.
Okay, ma'am.
Because then it is another matter that whole risk management, yes, severity you cannot reduce.
Okay.
Means you cannot say that you reduced it immediately. You have your risk control action. You propose that you will accept it. It will reduce. But then, like this AFAP scene, then you need to wait from the post-market or the vigilance data, not from your device, but from similar device as well.
Okay,
Then in the next round of, because that's what is annual or every 6 months when you do your update of risk management, because that's a standard practice which should be done. You've done it once, you put the device in market, you get your CE mark or whatever, and then continuously please assess your vigilance and as well as incidents or vigilance from similar devices. And then next round you can say, okay, there is no of such reports or some things, and you have not seen it with your device, then you can claim to reduce severity. But only after the vigilance plus advice or the consultation or expert advice of the clinical team.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
So I have a question. This is Mukund here. So there are many devices which are like IoT devices or SAMD. So in this case, there is the IT part also involved, and we have this NIST framework specifically for like let's say cyber security kind of risk. So is there any standard as such? I mean, in such in such kind of devices wherein we have both the hardware as well as the IT part closely coupled, uh, do we still go ahead with 14971 or like do we do with the combination of NIST and this?
Yeah, I know you always have to do the combination mostly, because if you have SMD, your software as medical device, then you need to really assess the risks as per the ISOs or the standards for softwares as well, plus 14971.
Okay.
Both
Okay.
together. You just cannot go standalone. Standalone 14971 really works for in vitros or medical devices. It really works for that. But
Yeah.
only standalone.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move ahead? So this is my favorite question. What is residual risk and how can they be justified? I think this is something that medical writers, medical device manufacturers, everybody wants to understand this better. What are the kind of residual risks that you can take forward with you into the market, and how do you justify them?
Yeah, so I guess this part let's try to touch upon this, maybe with some humor from, first of all, your Minions cartoon. If you just see this cartoon, I say, okay, I present you a device which is 99% good and 1% not good. Like you see, okay, adorable and it's despicable. But then now the real struggle is whether you will really accept this 1%, which is despicable, which you can say is your residual risk, or will you not accept this? So first of all, let's understand. I will try to make it as simple as I can. For residual risks, what is residual risk is not the risk you estimated. First of all, means what it is not the risk but you estimated at the beginning. It is the risk which still remains after you have put in all possible mitigations and risk control measures. So in equation, if you want to find out, you can say residual risk is equal to estimated risk minus your everything risk control actions, but it still remains. And that is where somebody asked me the question of up. Mostly this is the region where your residual risks are there, because you can reduce them as far as possible, but there is no way you can reduce it further. So now then you have to understand what it can contain. I guess Anushri was already in one of the talks when I explained the side effects of something. So we need to see now there are two different things, and it's a very strict requirement in now 1497 and MDR to declare your residual risks. So first thing is residual risk is of two kinds. Means there are two kinds which you can say. Residual risks are either side effects or after effects. So that also you need to slightly differentiate. There are, for example, there is a treatment. I will give you my industry example. You go for a dental implant, fine. So usual side effect of this dental surgery is swelling, discomfort, or gums infection, or whatever can happen. But this is not even the residual risk of your implant, dental implant. This is just a side effect of the procedure. So try to distinguish between that. This is a side effect, not a residual risk. Residual risk is after effect. Suppose your implant is made of a material which is really not appropriate or suitable for elderly population, but you still want to go ahead. That is the residual risk of your implant. You give people a dental implant which is wonderful, very good, does everything, but not suitable for 75 plus people. You cannot do any mitigation for that. So what you do is you accept it as a residual risk and you declare it as a risk. So what you have to do is you have to make exclusions. The simplest thing is to declare the residual risk is make exclusions from the indication. Exclude it from indication and clearly mention this is not suitable for elderly population or anything, because this is the risk. Clearly say this is the risk which is because of this active material in the implant and not suitable for this and this, and then justify that benefits of using it to other population are very high, so you covered with this residual risk. And please do not include side effects which I mentioned into your residual risks. So residual risk is to be declared, and it has to be declared. Simplest thing is you declare it very clearly and distinguish it or identify it from the safety instructions you do. That's one most common mistake. Another thing happening right now is when people write warnings. I guess all of you are familiar with IFUs where we write warnings, precautions. Those are the safety instructions for use of the device safely. These are not your residual risk declarations, because that's what lots of manufacturers try to do these safety instructions were marked as declaration of residual risk of the device. That's not true. Residual risk is the risk which still remains, but you accept it based on your overall benefit risk analysis and justify it. So distinguish it from safety instructions. That's my main point, or just take away, distinguish, and do not mention after effects. Please do not say like this, okay, this gum inflammation or having simple for vaccination, this stiff arm after your vaccination is a side effect. It's not a residual risk of the vaccine itself. Residual risk of the vaccine will be very crazy thing that you did everything. So that's my take. Residual risks need to be there. And another point is, please read TR 24971 clause 8, which really gives you very nice ideas, or it's a good 3-page explanation how to declare these things and how to do your overall benefit risk assessment. Please never do your residual risks standalone. Always link them with your indications, with your risk benefit assessment altogether.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Residual risk from side effects. That was very important because most people would actually consider side effects to be
No.
residual risk. But I think now we are going to be mindful of not doing that. So I think that was a very good takeaway point for me from this.
I guess because we struggled a bit, but right now I saw some examples where people really listed side effects as residual risks. So please declare, and in EU MDR now it's also really
Right.
kind of expected that you declare the side effects of the procedures you do with your devices, and you are not responsible to put a risk control or mitigation for this one.
Anybody have any questions before we move on to the last topic of this discussion today? Okay, so Shalu, the last thing that I want to understand from you is we all do a lot of literature reviews and we see safety outcomes that are reported for devices. Now, the question is, when does a safety outcome found in the literature become a device risk?
Yeah, I guess it is really very easy. I guess, Anushri, if you really carefully see when you do these literature search, because we always do this according with your vigilance reports. The moment you have any incident reporting with the similar device, if it is for your device, clearly it's a device risk. But even if you find recalls or incidents reported for similar devices, please go back to your risk analysis and see whether you also have the similar kind of function or use or the material or design with your device and consider it as a device risk, because that's really important. It's good, Anushri, you asked this, because this is really important that we somehow only consider our vigilance reports for our devices. So the moment you found any incident reporting or any literature which says the similar device had these many cases of this kind, please consider that it is a probable risk for your device as well, and see whether you have every control put in place for that, or have you even considered, because at times you will be surprised that you may not even have considered that risk, but it comes to you after the literature search or after the vigilance reporting.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Okay, I think like you started the answer with it, as easy as this. So yeah, now I'll have a better idea when I also look at these safety outcomes. I'll know how exactly it is that the risk team goes back and understands at what level, at what threshold these outcomes are going to start being device risk.
Yeah.
All right. I also have a question here, and this refers to the previous topics that we've discussed. Can you provide an example of how the red zone risks are justified to be acceptable?
Red zone risks are not acceptable at all. That I can tell you. If you have a high risk, if you can maybe go back, Anushri, to the slide of that red, blue, green.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, just because, see, if you see here, the red marks is high risks, which in your strategy, I would not recommend you to put them that you can accept these risks in any case. But it really, again, depends on your company and your risk management strategy. For me, what I have defined always is we can only accept high severity risk if it is remotely, probability is very, very, very low. Otherwise, no. So you can see here in this one, if you say whatever is marked red is non-acceptable. So if you have these 15 of these for your device, then there is no way you can really do a justification or saying your device is safe. It really has overall benefit risk ratio.
All right.
So I will not recommend, I won't recommend you to do that you really start defining your strategy that you will accept this red with severity 3 and probability 3 or 4, that you will accept it if it delivers a very high benefit, because it will be very tough for you when you do overall benefit risk analysis to justify that why you do this. So I won't recommend doing this, only if it is probability from all sides, from your side, from clinical team, from all experts. If you see probability is negligible, accept it, fine. Otherwise, please refrain from it and put design means control measures or mitigations everywhere.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, I think that justifies why these risks, of course, are the highest grades of risk and they are not acceptable. So, excellent.
Yeah, but if you have suppose 100 means suppose you have good 100 except you estimated 100 risks for your device and only you have 2 in this and you have 88 acceptable risks and benefits really are very high for the population, then you can honestly justify it. Then how you justify that to accept? It's my just recommendation. Please do not try to justify red zone risks.
Absolutely. Okay. Are there any other questions before we wrap up this discussion today? So, Charu, I do want to thank you so much because there are so many things that we work with on a daily basis, but you don't actually stop to think so much about it. And today I've understood things that I see on a daily basis and like risk scores and safety outcomes in literature. But I've understood what's the thought process behind this on the risk management side as well. And of course, your inputs about FMEA and risk management tools, hazard matrix, they have been very, very valuable. So, on behalf of the entire group, I do want to thank you. Any final words before we conclude the session today?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Anushri. I hope I could provide some answers. But then everybody in the group, maybe you can find me on LinkedIn. You can just write to me if I can help. I would try answering as much as I can. Yeah, thanks, Anushri, as well.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for listening to us today. This was another session of Tea Time Talks with MDRT, and we are going to be back with other topics to see you in the future sessions. Have a lovely day ahead. Bye-bye.